a very complex person, very deep, passionate about a lot of things, and I think it would be pointless of me to try to introduce her. So I'm gonna bring her up and let her do it in her own voice, how she feels comfortable. Join me welcoming Kari Calloway. What's up? You're like, hi. We here. All right. So as I said, I thought it wouldn't make sense to try and introduce you. So I'm gonna let you do that in your own voice. So I'm gonna jump right in and let you do that. Who is Kari? It's a deep question. Name, where you from, what you studied, however you want to interpret that. Who is Kari?
My name is Kari Calloway. I am from Decatur, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. I'm an African American studies major with a minor in women and gender studies, and also I do a little theater studies. I'm queer. What else?
That was spot on. That was a good introduction. Yeah, we got a lot there. So let's stick with Georgia for a bit. What was it like growing up in Decatur, Georgia?
Oh my gosh, it was black. There are black people everywhere. I was born in 1996, and in 1996, the World Olympics was in Atlanta. So that kind of like fundamentally changed Atlanta, in addition to Atlanta being a place to have the first black mayor ever.
So when you say change, you mean like in terms of like infrastructure and stuff like that?
When the Olympics comes to any part of the world, you see like a physical and economic shift in wherever it's being like housed. So like, in order to prepare for the World Olympics, a lot of black people who lived in this like city part of Atlanta moved into like the outer skirts of Atlanta. And like, so it's like this intro into gentrification that happened. And a lot of my family was placed on the outer skirts of Atlanta. So I'm pretty sure that like, if it wouldn't have happened in Atlanta in 1996, my life probably would have been a lot different. I probably would have like grown up in the city of Atlanta. And growing up in like a rural part, it's fairly rural, kind of like changed my experience because of the amount of resources that, you know, my elementary schools were allowed. So like that displacement kind of like oriented my life in a way that if the Olympics wasn't in Atlanta in 1996, my life probably would have been a lot different.
So you spoke about like resources for like school and stuff like that. How would you say like as a student in her first semester, first year at Brandeis, how did that affect you?
So I knew when I first got here, I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I had got my first paper and I had to like read all of this dense material, and I was like, oh yeah, girl, no, like that's not what is about to happen. So then I like was a part of Forward Hall 2015, which was like a really important movement for like Black existence at Brandeis, pre and contemporary. So that really kind of like oriented me in a different way here. But I think that specifically being a poor Black person from the South kind of like oriented me to think about the imagination, like to imagine or to think about the possibilities of like what I could be, and how like me going from the hood to here kind of like prepares me, but also how like that cultural shift like or put me in the world. So I think that, and I have a tattoo of 96 on behind my ear, because like I said, in my life I've experienced a lot of different like forms of displacement, and like those positions in the world have set me up to kind of like, I don't know, be who I am and how I am in the world today. So, yeah.
That's what's up. So I heard that you consider yourself an archivist. Why are you nervous? You good?
Because I'm like, I don't know what is
What
coming
did
up
you
next.
hear?
I don't know what this man is about to say.
No, but I heard that you consider yourself an
No.
archivist, and like most people don't know that you've done a lot of work with the archives here at Brandeis, especially the Black archives. So tell us a bit about that. How did you even get involved in doing that?
Oh my gosh. So I was started off in the archives very young. Um, my so I love to tell the story because I love to talk about my mama. But my mother. So I was raised by my aunt and my mother, my aunts and my mother. And on the weekends, she would work from 7 a.m. to 7 o'clock. And what my mother would do is she was like, we not finna go home and waste gas. My mother would literally like have us out in thrift stores all day long. So we would be at the thrift store and like while my mom was like going to, so like there's like like it gives insight into like for one, our socioeconomic status. Like my mom had to make do with what we have. So we spent a lot of time in thrift stores because like we couldn't afford to be at IKEA on the weekends.
Yeah.
So like that element of like our socioeconomic status is there, and I, have to deal with that. And we would like spend all day on Saturdays in like the fucking thrift store, and a lot of people, I feel like who were like my little sister would be like, we gotta go to the thrift store and stay.
Why are we here? Yeah.
And I was just like meddling, going through like dressers to see if somebody had left something, like just going through shit. And like I had really took a liking to like older things and like antique things.
Right.
And I also always loved the museum. So like being able to like, I always wanted to like be able to touch the thing that I was looking at. Which is like a politic of pleasure for me, is like I'm always thinking about what it means for us to like be able to look and not be able to touch, and like what community has to look like, or what safety has to look like in order for you to be able to do that thing. So I think about that a lot, which is also what brought me to the archives. It's like I know how I want to deal with Blackness and how I want to touch Blackness. And what do I have to do to put myself in the position to be able to do that? So that's kind of how I got organized. Associated with the archives is just like literally wanting to like touch things that once belonged to other people. When Ford Hall was over, we had materials that we knew needed to be archived, and we knew about how in 1969 some materials were gathered and they were placed into the Brandeis archive. And the way that the archives works is when you bring materials to an archive, they take the materials, and whomever brought the materials, they're named after that person. So you could take materials that belong to Abraham Lincoln, and like, or take materials that belong to someone of significance in your life to the archive because you knew that it needed to be taken care of, but it wasn't yours.
Right.
So a lot of the materials, when people go into the archives to look for histories about Blackness at Brandeis, are like outlined and named after white people. And like knowing how dangerous and violent that is, I took like a really big stand against that. And me and some other folk were like, okay, we're in here sleeping on this floor for 12 days, and the last thing we're gonna do is like have the stuff that we like worked on and created with our hands and with our blood and with our work be named after a white person.
Yeah.
So we very much like got involved with like the entire process of like naming, which is also something that is really important, specifically in like Black feminist history and just like Black history in general, is to have the ability to name yourself and name your things, because a lot of our ancestors like
didn't have that agency.
Right. So we wanted to have a really big foot in that, and it turned into what is now like Brandeis Black Archives Collective, because we all took different stances. I was more of the how can we archive and kind of like prove the histories of Black feminisms at Brandeis, because that history is a very rich and thick history. Because we have a lot of there were so many Black feminists specifically in the 1960s and 70s doing so much critical race work during this time, and a lot of those women were like at Brandeis and at Wellesley and at local universities that are really close to us. And I took I wanted to have my hands on that, and I was like, whatever that is, I want to touch it. So I kind of like took to that, and that's kind of like how I got involved with it. So yeah.
So looking at like, speaking about it in the context of like today's generation, like I know personally, I don't know if I've ever been to an archive. I think I went once for like a class, but there's so much richness and like importance in like visiting spaces like those, especially when they document Black history. So what are your thoughts on that, like this generation and like their relation to spaces like those archives?
I think that is with any generation or like with anybody, you have to like, and this transcends everything, it's like you have to always prove significance. Yeah. Like people never think anything matters until you like have to tell them. Yeah. Like that's the thing. Like sometimes people are like, yep, I like that, it matters. But sometimes you have to tell people. And I feel like for young people, if you have a shoe that you like, or if you have music that you like, or if you have anything that, like, think about something that is very important to you. That thing has a history. And like, even video games or like anything, like absolutely anything, it has a history. And I feel like if you care about what the thing is, you should care about where it came from. Yeah. And I feel like specifically with Black history, no matter where you are in the African diaspora, that is just really important to the contemporary livelihood, but also the upkeep of the thing, to know the history of it. A few months ago, or maybe like a year ago, there was like this really big archive of like shoes that was in the High Museum of Atlanta. And like literally just like boxes of shoes and like different like streetwear culture and people who have like take a liking to fashion, stuff like that is important. Yeah. Or like literally, Adrienne Marie Brown does a lot of work on like archiving the body and like archiving pleasure. And there are like so many different like Black archivists and Black artists who archiving is really important to them. And holding materials is really important, especially when like assessing the contemporary moment. So like when you go to a museum and there's like things that are saying the same things that people are saying today, and like being able to like have that moment of intimacy is really important. Yeah. And I think that like, again, like I said, a lot of Black feminists are like doing a lot of work to talk about the archive and just talk about like the body as an archive and talk about so many different things. And I think that there's a place for like everybody in the archives. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So there's a quote that you said that I really like. There you go, being scared again.
I'm like, right. What? Where's this coming from?
But you said Black people are always arriving. Yeah. I really like that. But I want you to tell the audience, what do you mean when you say that Black people are always arriving?
People are always after Blackness, whether it's shoes, music, hair, everything. Everything. And I think that we're always putting things out. We're always creating. We're always moving. We're always
setting the trends.
Yeah, like like Blackness is always coming for you with the mad tunes, like always out. Like Blackness never stops, and like we're always arriving. And a lot of people have been sitting at the table, and like we continue to like always be coming to the table. And I think that that's such an important place for Blackness to be, or for the diaspora to be at, because when you get to a point where you're like, okay, well, I'm here, like who's gonna look at me? It doesn't create, like nobody wants to deal with that. Like nobody wants to be in community with someone who is like, I have arrived, I'm here, and that's that on that. Like that's dusty, that's lame, that's boring. And you always want to be fresh. You always want to be hip. And I think that even when we find that something is being repeated from the past, that it's still, but it's still like in the contemporary, that even like when Blackness is older or when it's recycled Blackness, that it's still coming in ways that like people pick up old shoes that like I was in a meeting yesterday and someone had on some Clarks. And like one of my professors was like, yo, I had those when I was in college. And it's just like to see those moments again of like intimacy where people like identify with things that like were once that are like now, and how Blackness is always doing that back and forth of like in and out and in and out, even like when the world wants for us to be absent is like so important. So important.
So on the topic of arriving, graduation's coming up. You're about to be done with Brandeis. What would you say is the next thing, the next step for Kari?
Hopefully I'm famous. I'm sick of being broke. I'm sick of being broke.
When you're famous, remember me.
I'm sick of being broke. I don't know yet. I think that I want to be able to take care of my family, take care of my mother. I want to be a professor. I feel like I would be a pretty decent professor.
You think like you want to go back into the academic space like in a different way?
Honey, don't tell nobody.
Don't tell nobody.
People gonna be expecting for me to actually do it. But I really do. I really do. I think that I want to, of course, spend some time doing a lot of different things in the community. So like I really want to have a restaurant. That's like one of my big things. I know that I want to have a community archive. I know that I want to like do so many things. You know that I do so many things.
You do a lot, yeah.
And I want to like reverence all of the things that I can do. So I know that I'm going to do so much, but I'm probably, the first thing that I do is probably going to go back to grad school and like get a PhD so that I can just like get it out of the way.
Yeah. And I know you would kill it in the classroom, hands down. Yeah.
Don't tell nobody.
Kari, everyone.